Hello, friends. Welcome back to one more. It says episode 136, I'll have you know, Aaron,
Thank you for having me know that
of,
information. What do I do
of,
today?
of the Mindful CEO. Well, I just want to pat you on the back for sticking with it. That's 136 episodes over 4 years, and we're still evidently going strong. So,
Evidently, at least we're
evidently.
going strong. That's a
I don't
judgment.
know.
We're going. But the fact is, we've gone for this one.
That's right.
Yes. Yeah, it's
That's
always
right.
fun. And today, really one of my favorite or most interesting topics. So we have a great guest, Chris Miller, is writing a book on imposter syndrome, and it's something I grapple with all the time, and I would love to get into it and get his take on it. So, Chris, and there's two Chris's. So, even for the people listening, if you're just listening, I'm going to say Chris, and you're not going to know who I'm talking to, but that's how it goes. All right, Chris, why don't you take a moment and introduce yourself, and let's dive into what you learned about imposter syndrome and how we can work in that.
Sure. So I have been in various management roles for 20 years now, since my early 20s. Around 29, so a very non-traditional path, didn't go to university or college or anything, went right to the workforce, tried different jobs, didn't really like any of them, and then started my own business. It did not work out. I failed. I ended up moving back with my parents at 25, moving across the country, started working at a call center, and I moved promoted to shift lead, and then the call center was going to leave Canada, where I live, to go to the US. And so I was going to be out of a job. So I went and got a certification in project management. And a few months later, I was lucky enough to land a role managing all the IT and security systems for an airport expansion and replacing all the old ones. Knew nothing about the systems, the airports, or project management for that matter. But, I dove right in. I was doing 80 hours a week to make sure that I maintained. And because I had done well there, my director at the time said, "Hey, why don't you come out to Toronto, which is the biggest city in the country, and help me do the airport there? But instead of the IT and security, I want you to control all of it." It was $750 million portfolio. So I jumped into that, and after about 2.5 years, I'd been 5 years or so doing 80 to 100 hours a week, and I just crashed out. So I took a year off, studied. I've read over 300 books since then on leadership, psychology, neuroscience, all of that stuff. And I got a bunch of certifications, got back into the workforce and worked my way into management again, where I ended up becoming an executive. I was a director, a vice president. I've led, marketing, sales, services, support, really all of it essentially from end to end. And, what was really interesting was when I was in that first airport, as you can imagine, going from a call center to managing a $50 million IT and security program, imposter syndrome all over the place. Like I did not feel like I belonged in any of the rooms, like in that role. I didn't even know how the hell I even got that job for the first 2.5 years I was in it. So all of that reflection that led me to, once I had done executive roles for a few years, I realized I love coaching and mentoring people. And so that's what I kind of fell more into. And imposter syndrome was something I noticed so many people going through when they got promoted into management or into an executive role. So I really started to dig into what it was, how it affected me, how I overcame it. And then I use those lessons now to help other people do the same thing. So that's kind of where I'm
Awesome.
at. And now I'm writing a book on all my experience surviving the airport, which, by the way, I didn't mention, but my younger brother, who was a year younger than me, died about a year into that job at the airport. So I had to deal with imposter syndrome and grieving, which actually fuel each other, I would find out the hard way. So the book is
Wow.
about all of that.
Wow. All right. Well, define imposter syndrome so that we're all talking about the same thing because it's
Right.
a big
So
buzzword in the zeitgeist. Hang on, you got to let me say the word zeitgeist.
It's like, guys.
Very important that we get the word zeitgeist in every episode. So that's one. Okay.
Nope, fair enough. So it's really the feeling like you don't deserve success and that you feel like you're going to be caught at any minute or somebody's going to realize, oh, you're not capable or you don't deserve to be in this position, even when the evidence is that you do deserve to be there. You've done it well, but you still feel like you're going to be caught at any minute. And somebody's going to say, get out of here kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
How do you deserve to be there? Like what? So because like in your story, running an airport after being in a call center, like how did you what did you say to yourself that helped you realize you deserve to be there? Because you hadn't done that work before.
So at first, I'd say the first year and a half, I was constantly struggling, like something. I was about 3 weeks onto the job, and there was actually we were doing a cutover of an old system to a new system as a pilot, and we had to do this like 50 more times, and it went terribly. We ended up taking an airline down during peak hours for an hour and a half, which the airport got
Wow.
dinged with. So I'm struggling saying, holy shit, like I shouldn't be here, obviously. I'm not doing a good job. But then I actually had a mentor at the time who said, you need to step up and lead because you're not. You're letting everybody else lead because you don't know these things. You're trusting yourself. So that
Mm.
helped a lot. But then I also started to accumulate some wins. So from that blow up,
Mm.
we fixed it. And the next three after that, I put some systems in place based on the PMP, like my project management book. I just went there and copied a model and said, we're doing this. And then we
Mm.
started doing it and it worked. So I was like, okay, now I'm getting a little bit of wins in this role. And that kind of made me feel a bit more like, okay, I do deserve to be here because I am winning. But there was this constant tension in my brain of, I deserve to, now I don't, right? Something goes well, okay, I can do this. And then something doesn't, okay, I don't. So it was a lot of like getting those wins under my belt and telling myself, I was hired for a reason, even if they didn't see, like, they knew that I didn't have
Yeah.
airport
Right.
experience. So I would tell myself they hired me for some reason. And I tried to keep that in my mind when I would fall into that cycle.
What do you do, Aaron? Because
Well,
you,
it's interesting because I mean, on one hand, I'd like to. It's always. I mean, look, you having outside validation takes away the opportunity for imposter syndrome. Undercuts it. You have a mentor that's talking to you. That's great. You start to have wins, and you start to have enough self-confidence. But in the beginning, it's just you. And then in terms of, I mean, I encounter, when as I'm about to publish my book, Chris, you may be encountering this too. Like, you don't have a degree in psychology, do you?
No.
No, right. So, there's people in the space that have
mm,
done more than you. There's people in my space, mindfulness space, that have done way more than me, that have, I'm like, I'm not going to be able to compete
mm,
with them. I'm not going to be able to,
mm,
have that happen. And uh so there's the recognition of that, like, oh, this is all me talking to me about me. None of this is actually happening.
Mm-hmm.
mm,
None of this is happening. I mean, in your case, Chris, there's like, I know what's happening is this is my job. I am charged with doing this. That's what's happening. What's happening is I'm writing this book. What's happening is I'm creating this program, whatever it is that we're creating, Chris. No, what's happening is that, and we're going to see what happens when we take that action. It's imposter syndrome is, I mean,
mm.
on one hand, the sense, the body sensations that come with the state of the decision, I don't belong here. I'm going to be caught. I'm a
Yeah.
fraud. The body sensations and the entire thinking, that the anxiety that produces and all like that is all a reaction to itself. It's all self. Even if someone comes to you and yells at you, says you're not supposed to be here, outside, uh, your mentor is outside validation. What's the opposite of that? Outside.
What, intrinsic, extrinsic kind of thing?
Yeah,
Or
no, like outside degradation. Someone outside saying, Chris, how the hell did you get this job? You
ah,
took us offline for an hour and a half. What are you, stupid? You shouldn't be in this position, you idiot. And then that just gives you fuel, right? The inner dialogue
mm,
now has evidence
Yep.
for you shouldn't be there. But in any case, it's always you talking to you about you.
Yes. Yeah. It's all in here. It's
Yeah,
all in head game, basically.
yeah. And so if you can, where mindfulness is useful for me in that, answer your question, what do I do about it? Is if I can just sit and notice, oh, wait a minute, none of that's happening. What's happening is my ass is in the chair, my feet are on the floor.
mm,
What's happening is I'm sitting and I'm breathing, and that person said blah, blah, blah. And I said I would do X. I get paid to do X. Or I said I would create this book, or I'm interested. all of that's part of the circumstance, and nothing else is happening. Now, what am I going to? Now, what could I say about all this? And if you can slow it down enough, then you get, the opportunity to say something that moves the ball forward.
Mhm.
Or, you fuck up and the airlines don't go off for an hour and a half, or God forbid there's some tragedy and you really, doctors have to deal with this all the time, you, if you don't want a job where someone could die, don't be a doctor. Don't take if you're unwilling to have a job where someone could die out of you doing it, then don't do those jobs. I mean, go make pizza, do something else. But it's a question. For me, it's always a question of slowing down enough to take apart what I am saying to myself about me. I think that's what that comes down
Makes
to.
sense. But Chris, you raised a good point about intrinsic and extrinsic, because something I've learned, and to your point, Aaron, is that when it comes to imposter syndrome, biologically, it's actually the result of your sympathetic nervous system being hyperactive and
Oh,
stress hormone pumping through your body. And one of the things I actually tell people that are struggling with it is things like, to your point, Aaron, mindfulness, right? Because that can actually take you into parasympathetic, where you calm yourself down and you can actually have the logic part of your brain now active, and you can break that cycle, because imposter syndrome, the fuel for it is the stress, right? It is being stuck in that survival mode. And if you can break survival mode, you can break the imposter syndrome as well, which is something I've learned since then.
and
Mindfulness is a great way to do that.
yeah, good. So talk to me about talk to me about the sympathetic nervous system going off. Like, do you know the biology beyond that? Like, what is it that's so threatening about the situation
Right.
that it would trigger that kind of a response?
So, the parts of your brain like the amygdala and things like that are triggered by the unknown, right? Our brains hate uncertainty. And as soon as there's uncertainty in our environment, because of our, anthropological, how
Yeah.
we basically evolved to where we are, everything that was unknown was a threat to our survival. So our brain evolved and got used to, if I don't know something, or there's an open circuit or an open loop, then it starts filling in that loop with all these what ifs. And that's actually where things like conspiracy theories come from, right? Because your brain starts saying, oh, this is the reason behind that. Oh, and in imposter syndrome's case, it's because you're not good enough, is the what if that your brain starts telling you when you get triggered in that survival mode. And what we've learned is that through neuroscience,
Mm.
our survival mode, our emotional side, it's the emotional brain essentially, it is triggered much faster than the logic can catch up to it. So that's why manipulating people is easy, because you could trigger their emotions instantly, like in a matter of milliseconds, but it takes a few seconds for the logic to spin up. And unless you consciously know how to break through that survival brain, once it's been activated emotionally, you get stuck in that loop. And that's how imposter syndrome starts to actually get you trapped in that. And there's actually this interesting, so there's this woman, Valerie Young, and she started the Imposter Management Institute. And she identified 5 different triggers essentially for imposter syndrome. So there's 5 types of imposter syndrome. There's the perfectionist. So if you get anything wrong, like let's say you do something 100 times and 99 times you do it perfectly, that one time it'll trigger your imposter syndrome. And you'll get stuck in your brain emotionally in survive mode on that one thing and only that one thing, right? And you get stuck in the trap. There's the expert, where you know your field, you know your stuff. If there's something you don't know, it triggers your imposter immediately, right? Your survival mode kicks in.
Oh, that's excellent.
Yeah, there's the natural genius, which that's one of the ones I have, where if you don't pick up on something immediately or master it right away, you feel like a failure, and that triggers your imposter syndrome. There's the soloist, where if you have to ask for help in any way, then you fail, right? You're an imposter. And then there's the superhuman. So there's this book I read recently called Super Communicators by Charles Duhigg. Really good book. But it talks about how we all have different identities. So you're, let's say you're a leader and a manager, you're a spouse to someone, you're a brother, you're someone's child. So you've got all these different identities and you're juggling them. And if you fail in one area, so let's say you're killing it at your job, but you forget your friend's birthday, that will trigger your imposter syndrome because you failed at one of your identities. So those 5 different things are actually triggers that pretty much everybody falls into. And what's interesting is that people like Charles Schultz, who I start the book with, who started Starbucks, he struggled with it until his 100th store was opened, right? You've got people like Lady Gaga, Tom Hanks, who at the prime of their careers, they were struggling with imposter syndrome as well. So it doesn't matter how successful you are, doesn't matter how much evidence there is that you're good at what you do or whatever, you get stuck in that emotional brain and you can't unstick it.
Mm-hmm. What do we do with that, Chris? So we know that imposter syndrome is a thing, and we can even say there are 5 kinds of imposter syndrome. And now that I know it, it sounds like it's still going to come up. So what's the point? Like, we're all screwed to be imposters. Like, what do we do with that? What do we do with this knowledge?
So there's different ways, and this is something that neuroscience has really been able to figure out the last few years. There's a really good book called Neuroscience for Organizational Change that I read years ago, and it actually talks about things that you can do that they've been able. So there's what's called a functional MRI, and they're able to map the brain waves when you go into this thing. So whatever you think, it actually traces the neural network that your energy is traveling down and all that. And what they were able to identify is that there's a whole bunch of different things, mindfulness being a big one, breathing exercises, exercise, taking a walk in nature, listening to some sort of instrumental music that doesn't have heavy bass, things like that. They all actually settle your nervous system, and they can take you out of the sympathetic nervous system into parasympathetic nervous system, which is your rest and digest. And once you've achieved getting into parasympathetic, your imposter syndrome calms down because the area of your brain that causes it, basically it shuts off or it weakens, and the logical side takes over.
Are we saying that when you're in a more restful, mindful state, that better work happens? Are we saying, like, if you can get your imposter syndrome to take a seat for a minute, that you're going to have a better outcome? Like,
Yep. That's exactly it. If you can walk yourself back out of the survive brain, essentially, and bring yourself into that calm, rest and digest or parasympathetic brain, it literally shuts off the imposter, because the imposter is about being stuck in that loop where you're telling yourself a story that I'm not good enough, I'm not good enough. And a lot of that is driven by things like your stress hormone pumping through your body, which things like walking in nature, exercise, mindfulness, they actually flush that stress hormone out of your body. And that takes you out of imposter syndrome.
Aaron, this is interesting. It reminds me of your audience profile that you sent to me yesterday, where the composite of your avatar is uses anxiety as sort of like a way to perform, as a way to show up. And I could see how sort of that imposter syndrome would really be pushing that button of anxiety to be like, and I'm afraid, and it said people are afraid to lose their edge. Right. I don't want to put my anxiety on the side. I don't want to do deep breathing and get to parasympathetic, because if that's going to cause me to lose my edge, I'm going to be like this little lump on a couch. It's all like relaxed. I need this anxiety. I mean, I think that becomes a hard thing to get rid of imposter syndrome if you're addicted to the anxiety that it creates.
And God, you just said this, and I had this thought, and it disappeared. I don't.
I talked over you.
Hang on, wait. Let's see. No, you didn't talk over me. I was trying to talk over you, and you didn't let me talk over you, which is really the issue here. Okay, you got to apologize for not letting me interrupt. That's what's happening here. But the thing, so the why keep just inside this conversation? I'm just making this up. But it seems like, why keep the imposter syndrome going? Why keep that anxiety going? It's not why keep the imposter syndrome going. But if the imposter syndrome fuels the anxiety, and that's what fuels our success, it seems like woven into that is, and if I stop, they'll find out I'm a fraud. If I don't keep performing, they're going to find out I'm a fraud. And that keeps it's the glue between those two things that keeps it together. I can't stop, because then they'll find out. So let me just keep producing. And
so interestingly, you guys know the concept of flow, right? Where you hit that flow state, yes. Kind of the world around you stops existing, and you're just super focused on that task, and you're just absolutely killing it in that moment. So that's actually what the goal should be. It's not to completely reduce all anxiety. It's to redirect the anxiety. So you want to reduce it enough that you can break through the emotional brain piece, but then you pick something like a task. That's why like exercising is good. But if there's something you actually want to focus on and get done, like a hobby or a piece of work, you redirect your focus and your anxiety energy to that thing, and that will actually help enable you hitting flow state, because you've got enough anxiety to push you forward, but not so much that it's overwhelmed your system and you're stuck in imposter loop.
And let's just talk about it a little bit from is there a mechanism? I mean, look, on one hand, I know the answer to everything. I know the answer to everything is slow down, right? But it is. I mean, on one hand, the answer to everything is to slow the fuck down
Yep.
and get out of fight, flight, or fright, get out of sympathetic, find some way, all those ways you were talking about.
Mhm.
But is there anything else that you know to say, or Chris, to just talk about the difference between feeling like an imposter and a real skill gap that you need to address?
Yeah, and that's
We
fair.
sort of
That can be a
this
thing.
now weaves in Dunning-Kruger. Like, I don't have imposter. Like, there's a lot of fucking people that are in charge of a lot of things that should have some fucking imposter syndrome because they don't know what the fuck they're doing.
Yeah.
And the fact that they don't have imposter syndrome is a little Dunning-Kruger effect in action. And really, they really need to slow the fuck down and they don't know what is going on. But what's that? Talk a little bit about that difference between imposter syndrome as a feeling and actually having a skill gap.
So, and that's actually a really good question, because obviously, in my position where I started the airports, I didn't know any of the systems and all that. I had massive skill gaps, right? So, there was some legitimacy to my imposter syndrome. But what I actually did was I sat down and I would take home the airport manual at night, and I would sit down and go, okay, I'm going to list out all the things that I don't know that I need to learn. And I literally made a learning plan for myself. And so once I was able to kind of de-escalate myself emotionally from the imposter spin, I would then sit down and start going through that list of, okay, I need to learn this system. I need to learn what this stuff means. I need to know what these acronyms are. And I would redirect that anxiety and turn it into productive fuel to go through and start filling in those gaps by learning all those things. But to do that, obviously, you have to have an incredible amount of self-awareness, and you have to be willing to admit what you don't know, to your point. And I think that's part of the challenge a lot of people have, is they don't want to admit what they don't know. And there's also like our blind spots too, right? So having people that in your life that can kind of say, let's step back for a second, or a coach even, and say, here are some of the gaps that we need to fill. That could be a huge win. And that's where my mentor came in for me. It was him kicking me in the ass saying, you need to start leading these people. That's why I hired you. I didn't hire you to be an expert at what they do. I hired you to lead. So start leading. And that was kind of what triggered me to go, okay, I'm going to sit down and figure out what I don't know so I can start filling those gaps.
That's great. I love that.
Yeah. This is a off topic, but you brought it up, and I found it interesting, and there was probably a way back to our conversation from this. But you talk about fMRIs, functional MRIs, which I didn't know the F was for functional when I read this. So I know literally just enough to be dangerous about this. But they were talking about there is an inverted U with meditators, where in the beginning of meditation, the brain waves go down, and short-term, medium-term meditators, the stress goes up until you get better at meditation, then the stress goes back down. Long-term meditators have the stress go back down. But there's this stage in which it goes up, which I thought was super interesting. Like, first of all, they measure that. And then I love it when they measure things that have already shown up. Like, you've measured something that I already talk about. Like, now neuroscience has caught up to it. But I was interested in it because it also explains, I think, Chris, the dip, or the valley of despair. Seth Godin's The Dip, that when you start a new task, you get really shitty. Results start going up, and you get really shitty at it. James Clear calls it the valley of despair.
Yeah.
Right? The interest, it gets hard, and up. And I just thought that was a really interesting use of an fMRI. And you said functional MRI. I was like, oh, that's what the F stands for. I just read about that. But, inside, I would suspect that imposter syndrome really kicks in, not at I don't think I don't know. I'm just looking for myself. Um, I don't have imposter syndrome on tasks I haven't started,
Right.
right? I think there's a fear of getting started, but it's not that I have I don't think I'm going to get found out. I think I'm just going to fail.
Hmm.
Imposter
Mhm.
syndrome comes in, during the dip, during oh, wait a minute, it comes up when you take on an idea, you enjoy it, you're having fun at it, it's good, it's exciting, you got a promotion, Chris, manage the airport. Oh yeah, baby. It's exciting. But before you were like, well, what the fuck am I doing? There must have been like, let's go out for drinks. Like you got interested in it. And then we walk ourselves into a situation that we don't know about. We hit the hurdle. We're putting in the action, but
Hmm.
not getting the results in a creative process. That the
Yeah.
first hurdle comes up and the next hurdle comes up, and then our stress goes up. I know this happens when people meditate. This is why 90% of people drop out on the apps, Chris. I'm 100% sure about it.
Yeah.
Because when you learn how to meditate on an app, you're like, you have no one to get you on the other side of that hump. Um, but it, I would be surprised if imposter syndrome didn't follow the same fMRI curve as the dip, as the valley of despair. Like, and
Mhm.
until you get enough, like you said, Chris, you got enough history, enough production, enough performance that you could get, oh, I actually can do this. And you worked yourself out of that. I think all those things are related. Ha! Worked ourselves back to that conversation. There you go.
I
Um,
think too, there's a thing in here for me that if I brought my own premise of my work into this, like where I have a heart for leading their work, like every person who has a calling that senses a bigger game to play, um, in that dip because of imposter syndrome will decide, oh, this is not my work. Oh, this is work I should not do. And they'll take themselves out of really meaningful, impactful work that could create change, but because of that imposter syndrome, like you're saying, Chris, they'll take themselves out of it. So it seems interesting to begin to explore how do we get our head around staying in the game even when imposter syndrome's there. As a coach, do you have practices? We always like to talk about
Mhm.
practices here, Aaron and I,
Yeah.
because it's important to do something about it, not just think about it.
Yeah, so one of the big things, there's a couple of things that I do when people start to kind of struggle with the imposter syndrome. And I don't know if I want to continue with this. I actually had one girl who had been, she was a Salesforce marketing systems person, and she wanted to get into project management. And once she started to do the role, she started really struggling with imposter syndrome, saying, I don't know any of this stuff. I don't know, I'm a systems person. I'm not somebody who's good at communicating and organizing people and all that. So she wanted to leave it. And the first thing I did was I sat her down and said, okay, talk to me about times in your life where you completely just failed at something to the point where it like impacted you as a person. And she's like, thought about it for a second. She's like, well, I don't think I've really failed that degree at something. I'm like, okay, so why would this be any different? Right. So the first thing I want to do is start getting them in the mindset of think about the wins that you have. Think about the times you've had to struggle and overcome other things, because now I'm conditioning them to think from a different mindset. The other thing I do is I have them write down all of the things that they have won at. So even in that role, you were able to do this successfully, write it down. You're able to get this person aligned on that, write it down. You got this milestone done, write it down. And you start building what's called a confidence list, essentially, quick list. And anytime you start feeling like you're not enough, like your confidence is waning, go through your list, because your brain, like imposter syndrome, it has a hard time sticking around when
mm,
you have a list of evidence in front of you
Mm.
that here's all the things I've done and all the wins that I have, because now you're feeding your brain evidence of truth, which overcomes the stories that you're telling yourself that drive imposter syndrome. So that's a couple of the ways. Think about the wins and make yourself a list of those wins that you can pull out at any time and tell yourself, okay, I've done all this stuff. Because it's really about building self-trust, right?
Yep.
Confidence is about
Yep.
self-trust. It's not about,
Yep.
I feel confident, I go do something. No, you trust yourself that even if you don't know it, you'll figure it out. And that comes through that mindset of wins.
I used to say this all the time, Aaron, to real estate agents. It was, especially new real estate agents, they would come in and They had their previous life before they got licensed as an agent. Then they'd get licensed and they would what I call do realtor. They'd put on a real estate hat and think, I need to be a realtor. I need to do realtor. And so then they would feel out of sorts about, oh, they would just were so clunky in their communication was just so like, who are you even right now? I said, like, you had a previous life. Don't toss that out. Bring that forward because you can stand on the confidence, like you're saying, the confidence of who you've been being your whole life. People hire you, evidently, in your story, Chris, people hire you not for your skill set all the time. Sometimes they hire you because of they feel safe with you, they feel comfortable with you, they see promise in you. Like, and I this is why I love pointing people back to their lived experience because when you lead from your lived experience, you have a foundation that you are familiar with. You're like, I know what I failed and I know what I've succeeded in. That's lived experience. And I think sometimes we, like you said, Aaron, people get stuck in like, well, I've read so many books and people have done things bigger, better than me and as a realtor or as a mindfulness coach or as a
Right.
whatever. But that lived experience piece, I think, really is the levels the playing field for people because we're all humans having a human experience and we all have things, we all have failures, we all have successes. Anyway,
Yep. Totally
Yeah,
agree.
of course. Uh, God, where do the thoughts go? Um, the you say that last thing again before we're all humans, because I don't want to argue with you about that.
what did I say before that?
Yeah,
Which
what
part?
was
Lived
Which part? I said a
experience.
bunch. What's that,
um
Chris?
the as lived experience? That I think that's and
Uh-huh.
then and oh my God, other
Well,
Chris,
there's
Chris Miller. You were talking.
yeah.
It's very hard for me. It's very hard for me to make a thought, much less distinguish between two Chris's. Jesus. Um, uh, there's you, you're talking about the as lived experience of something, about getting yourself there. And Chris Miller, you were talking about the brain invents imposter syndrome as a reaction to uncertainty,
Yeah.
that the brain hates uncertainty, the human being hates uncertainty. So rather than dwell in the uncertainty of life, we'll at least make up something protective called, failure. At least that feels familiar.
Mm,
Hmm.
The devil I know better than
mm,
the uncertainty of the whole thing. And so, in a real way, the only oh, this is good. The only way out of imposter syndrome in so far what we're created is through is
Hmm.
you bring it with you. You don't try and deal with it. You don't try and make it go away. You just like, okay, that's a possible interpretation. I'm going to do it anyway. Thanks for sharing. Now let's go run this airport. Regardless how I feel about it, that we've got it. This project needs to go off, or I got an imposter syndrome. Now we're gonna, this is the Bob Weir story about walking on stage. The stage fright that
mm,
we talk about. That there's this fear of performance. There's this fear of failure that shows up like I'm going to be found out. And the only way out of that is to bring it with you rather than have you let it bring you with it.
mm,
Those are the
mm.
choices that we have in some scenarios. I'm slowing down a little bit because I find the only way out is through is not a generally useful paradigm, but it is a useful paradigm in this case. I think it is a very useful paradigm in this case that the only way out of imposter syndrome is to bring it with you and perform anyway. That it's not going to, and then you can build up, like you said, the list, the muscle memory of having succeeded sufficiently that, okay, you know, it's going to work out.
Yep. And that's how I overcame it ultimately, right? It was through and it was realizing your feelings can lie to you because it's neurochemicals that to your point earlier, it's all in your head. So
Mhm.
it's just you screwing with you essentially. But when you have enough wins, I find, or once you've had enough experience and said, hey, I didn't know that and I overcame it. I didn't know that and I overcame it. Then you've got that self trust enough that the muscle memory of the self trust is what will get you over the imposter syndrome because you'll get to a point where throw whatever you want at me, I will figure it out. And that's where
Mm,
that confidence overwrites the imposter syndrome.
mm.
Mm. I love that. because I
Yeah.
just hear an edge in that. There's now you've taken something that was a liability and you've turned it into an edge. You have evidence that I've done this before. I'll figure this out. And to your point, Aaron, to the point of your audience profile, just wanting an edge, not wanting wellness, but wanting performance enhancement, wanting an edge to something. And God, Chris, I love that. I love the pivot on imposter syndrome. Like it actually becomes a lever
Mm-hmm.
for if you deal with it, right? If you don't just run from it or use it as anxiety to drive performance, but you actually use it as a teaching tool, you use it to do deeper work. You use it to learn something about yourself. Then it becomes a performance enhancer.
Absolutely. And I tell people it's a signal, you're signaling to yourself that you care about that thing. So let's
Mm,
leverage that and turn your anxiety into productive fuel, essentially, by reshaping the mindset that you're bringing to the engagement. And that's where those tools come in. Like the other thing that really helps is naming it or calling yourself out, right? And this is from a book called Positive Intelligence. So if your imposter syndrome hits, a good way to break the imposter syndrome is say to yourself, that's my imposter. That's my imposter attacking me
mm,
again, because it brings you back into the logical brain
Mhm.
and breaks the emotional, sympathetic side of things.
Yeah. There's that book, Alter Ego. Is that the book? Are you familiar with this? Hang on, now I gotta look it
There you
up.
go.
Alter Ego. Hang on.
mhm,
And the book it's great. It's a great read about the alter ego effect is what it's called. Todd Herman, and he's built a coaching business off of this, but he his methodology is crafting a persona that you identify as, and
mm,
he uses a couple of really big examples that Beyonce uh, creates a persona before she goes on stage, is someone different human being, like Bo Jackson, different human being off the field and on the field, like for himself, relates to himself as a completely different human being, and that human being that he relates himself to has completely different set of traits, characteristics,
mm,
habits, is a completely different human being that he gets to embody when he's on the field, or she gets to embody when she's singing. um,
Right.
Sasha Fierce, that's what she calls her, right? That's Sasha Fierce. That's her alter ego that she is on stage. And if she weren't able to be that human being on stage, she wouldn't exist for us, as we only see her from that perspective. Um,
Right.
but it's really great. It's an interesting read, especially inside this, because it's a specific methodology for developing a strategy to defeat imposter syndrome by completely bypassing. It has nothing to do with you, right?
mm,
It institutionalizes the it's made up factor.
mm.
Mm-hmm.
Like goes, oh well, it's totally made up. It's just you talking to you about you. Why don't you have you talk to you about someone else and be that person? And what traits does that person embody? And why don't you just for the time that you're out to perform, embody those traits? You don't have to be that all the time, but you're different. You're a different person at home with your wife than you are with your mom, or a different person at work. You're different people all the time anyway. You could just take a little bit of control about it. I
Right.
haven't read it since I've, really started all deep diving into mindfulness. I should go back and reread it. Yeah, Todd Herman. I think you'd like it,
Interesting.
Chris.
Yeah, I wrote that down. That's
Yeah,
definitely going to check that out. Yeah, that's kind of like disassociation in psychology, where you're looking at things from a third person perspective and
yeah,
taking yourself out of the first person to analyze it, which
right.
makes
And,
sense.
right. From a
Or what?
mindfulness perspective, that's all you ever do is you're just observing
Right.
self as whatever seems to be happening at the moment, and it's not you anyway. You're neither that person or this person. You're nothing, and then whatever you choose to give your attention to.
This was you asked about this on Facebook today, Aaron, about Carl Jung, because
Yeah,
Jung was talking about parts work. Like there are these parts of ourselves, and in personal coaching, we can actually talk to the parts of ourselves, right? Like I'm going to talk to the critic now, or I want to talk to the protector now, or what. A lot of those life coaching programs will walk you through parts work as well. But yeah, that's interesting. Hmm. Wow. Well, Chris, how do we sort of wind up this conversation? What would you leave people with in the space of
Um,
imposter syndrome and performance?
I would say so. The biggest tip that I give people that I coach who struggle with imposter syndrome is look at where you are, look at how far you've come, like look at all the things you've done, like I mentioned earlier, like that list. And it doesn't, you can make a physical list, which actually does help to memorize like your wins and all that. But the big thing I ask people every time, when have you ever failed so badly at life that you couldn't pick yourself up and try again? I have never had a single person say that's never happened to me before. And that alone, I find, helps to start shift the mentality of I can't to I can try again. And I can try again is a powerful way to counter your imposter syndrome. Just don't let yourself fall and quit. Pick yourself back up, knowing that you can always try again. Biggest thing I know.
It's awesome. So good. Well, Chris, if people want to learn more about your work and what you do, maybe your upcoming book, what's the best place for people to go?
So I actually have a podcast called the Leadership Gambit, and we talk about psychology, neuroscience, different aspects of leadership, management, things like that. And the book Imposter will be out around September is what we're targeting right now. And that'll be on like Amazon and stuff like that. There's also a website you can go to, theleadershipmovement.net.
Got it. I'll write it down.
Cool.
I'll put it in the show notes, everybody, if you want to click on those. Theleadershipmovement.net, you said?
Yes. And the podcast is the Leadership Gambit.
Perfect. Love it.
Which I'll be on May 7th.
Yep.
Hey.
Hey. Great, Chris. Really, thank you so much. It's such a great conversation. Really, really useful. Chris and I were talking earlier about utility. Is it useful for performance? Where's that? If it's not useful for performance, it's not just philosophical. If it's not useful for performance, it's just philosophical. We want things that impact performance, and this really does. So I really appreciate your time. Thanks for being here, man.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on.
Okay.
Those of you listening, if you want to subscribe, if you haven't subscribed, whatever channels you listen on, please do that. And if you want to leave us a review, do us a solid and tell us what you think about the show. All right. Until next time, everybody. Peace out.
Peace. Excellent.